Hey team. Okay, so today we're going to talk about what is behavioral science, or behavioral science 101, if you will, or LOL, I guess. So we're going to chat about three things. The first thing is what is behavioral science? Then we're going to give some examples, and then finally we're going to talk a little bit about how the field of behavioral science has changed over the years, because it's only about 15 years old, so still a teenager. Rightio. So what is behavioral science? Behavioral science is just the study of how and why people make decisions. That's all it is. And then as a behavioral scientist, they take those ideas and apply them to try and change behavior. So another way that I like to think about behavioral science is I imagine this guy. So this is Majin Buu, who you might recognize if you grew up in the 1990s. Majin Buu was a villain in Dragon Ball Z, and what he would do is he would absorb other characters and take on their powers to become stronger. And in a non-creepy, non-villain-like way, that's kind of how I think about behavioral science. Because what behavioral science does is it takes ideas from a bunch of different disciplines, from sociology, from psychology, from criminology, anthropology, statistics, economics, and neuroscience, and others, and it combines them to make itself stronger. Okay, so it's all a little bit vague though, but what are some examples of behavioral science? So I'm going to give you three. So the first one is a case study looking at how do we use behavioral science to encourage people to save for retirement. So the problem is not enough people are saving for retirement. Sad. So why not? And the answer is it kind of sucks. It's hard, it's confusing. There's so much paperwork to fill out if you want to join a retirement fund. And so someone somewhere asked the question of, well, how can we make it easy peasy to save money for retirement? And then they came up with this idea of defaults. So what if someone didn't have to do anything? They were just automatically enrolled in a retirement savings account. And on the surface, this makes sense. Like, who would you rather be? Would you rather be this person who wants to save money for retirement, but they have to fill out form after form after form after form after form after form, or after form, or would you rather be this person who they don't have to do anything when they start a new job? They're just automatically enrolled in a retirement savings account, so a certain percentage of their paycheck goes into that. Definitely that dude. He looks way happier. And so here are the results. So of one study at least. So on the y-axis is the percentage of people who were saving money for retirement, and on the x-axis is people when there was no default and when there was a default. And you can see that when there was no default, just under half of people were saving money for retirement. When there was a default, this was bumped up to 86%. So it's a huge percentage of people who are now saving money for retirement. Yay. Okay, so the second example of behavioral science is encouraging more people to pay their taxes. So this is a classic study of behavioral science. The Leonardo da Vinci of behavioral science studies, if you will. So in the UK, a decent chunk of people were not saving money for retirement. And so to remind them, there was another thing, were not paying their taxes. And so to remind them to pay their taxes, they would send these people letters. And a certain part of the letters would say different things. Some people got this letter, person, and they got a letter. And the letter would say something like, 9 out of 10 people in the UK pay their taxes on time. You are currently in the very small minority of people who have not yet paid us. So the idea is you're basically saying 9 out of 10 people, most people do this thing, they pay their taxes, you do not do this thing, and that person's going to be like, that's sad, I want to be one of these people, and so they're more likely to pay their taxes. And they did. When people got sent these letters, the social norm letters, they were more likely to pay their taxes. Within 23 days, the government collected around $1.9 million that otherwise would not have been collected. So that is an example of social norms, that we are often influenced by how other people around us behave. And then the third example is applying for university. So the problem they had was a lot of smart high school students from low income areas were not applying for university, and they wanted to encourage more of them to apply. So what they did is they found 2 smart university students who were also from low income areas, and they had these students write letters to smart high school students from low income areas to encourage them to apply. And I'll show you the results. So on the y-axis is the percentage of students who applied for university, and on the x-axis is the different conditions. We have the control group. Letter home is just if they received one of those letters at home. Letter to school is if they received another letter but at school. Letter to home and school is if they received both of those letters. And so the control group, around 8.5% of people applied, whereas in the other conditions, much more. People who got sent both of those letters at home and school were 11.4%. And the difference between 8.5 and 11.4, it doesn't really seem like that much, but over the course of a year, that works out to be about 330 students, extra students, who apply to university who wouldn't have otherwise. That's many more students who go to university, who will probably get jobs, who could affect, the trajectory of their life, all for quite a simple letter. Right? This is 330 people, so it's quite a lot. So behavioral science took those ideas, the ideas of defaults, the ideas of social norms, the ideas of receiving messages for people like themselves, and applied them. And this is crucial, they also tested them. Behavioral scientists love to test things. Like this person, he loves to test things. And the reason we test things is because even when an idea sounds good, we don't always know it's going to work. So it's important that we test things. For example, there was this big work done in England again, where they wondered if we put a social worker into a school, we might be able to stop certain events from escalating. So there would be some kids who might have some challenges, and normally that might escalate to the point where you might have to get government agencies involved, and the problem could be quite bad. So if we put a social worker in a school, they might be able to intervene a bit early and stop some of these cases from escalating. Makes sense, right? And this was a massive bit of work. It was $20 million. It took 3 years. It involved 280,000 students, and it did not work. Having the social worker inside the school did not prevent cases from escalating. Now, this is actually a great thing, because if they didn't test it to see if this worked, they could have spent more money, more time, more resources on an idea that doesn't do anything, when they could have used that time and money and resources on an idea that might actually help. So it's important where we can to test our ideas. So the third and final thing that we're going to look at is behavioral science around the world. So this is how behavioral science is used globally. So the very first behavioral science team was created in 2010. This is them. It was in the UK, and it was called the Behavioural Insights Team. They were also called the Nudge Unit. So now I'm going to show you a very quick and dirty graph that tells us something about how the number of behavioral science teams have changed over time in the 15 years since. Now, I have to warn you, the difference, it's a little bit subtle, so you might have to zoom in. So we have a graph here. We have on the y-axis the number of teams, and on the x-axis we have the year. So we can see in 2010 there was one behavioral science team, and in 2025 there was 366. So there are far more behavioral science teams now than there are 15 years ago. It's grown a lot. This is another way to think about it, a picture from OECD. You don't have to read all of that, but you can just see there's a lot more behavioral science teams around. And there's not only a bunch of behavioral science teams in countries, but there's also a lot of behavioral science teams in kind of global institutions. So for example, the United Nations, they have their own behavioral science team, as does the World Health Organization, as does the World Bank, as does the European Commission, as does the OECD. So behavioral science teams around the world have grown and continue to grow. Woo! We love that. We love behavioral science. Okay, so now we're going to wrap it up. So behavioral science is the study of how and why people make decisions, and then behavioral scientists will take those ideas, apply them, and test them. And behavioral science is growing. Fantastic. And that's it. That's the video. If you have any other questions, let me know.